Cain and Abel explained, the first murder or the first sacrifice. We are all told the story of Cain and Abel, the first sons of Adam and Eve. A simple, tragic tale of two brothers, one a tiller of the soil, the other a keeper of sheep. A story of two offerings to God, one accepted, one rejected. And a story of the terrible, envious rage that followed, a rage that led to the first fratricide, the first spilling of human blood upon the new earth. It is the archetypal story of jealousy, of sin, and of a divine punishment that would echo through all of history. But what if this is a simplification, a moral lesson created to mask a far deeper, more terrifying, and more fundamental truth about the nature of our world? What if God's rejection of Cain's offering was not a judgment, but a command? What if the earth, newly separated from the paradise of Eden, required a different kind of nourishment to sustain life? What if the first murder was not a sin, but the first terrible and necessary blood sacrifice? Today, we journey to the lands east of Eden, to a time when the world was young and the laws of God and nature were still being written. This is not just a story of two brothers. This is the story of a hungry earth, a reluctant priest, and an innocent lamb. A story that asks the terrible question, what if Abel was not just the first man to die, but the first man to be sacrificed? Welcome to the Eldritch Codex. Today, we seek to explain the story of Cain and Abel, not as the first murder, but as the first and most tragic sacrifice. To understand the tragedy of Cain and Abel, the first true children of humanity, we must first understand the world into which they were born. It was not the perfect, effortless, and eternal paradise of their parents' youth. The memories of the Garden of Eden, if they were told of it at all, would have sounded like a fantastical, impossible dream. For Adam and Eve, having been cast out of the garden for their transgression, for their choice to eat of the fruit of knowledge, now lived in a new and harsh reality. The world outside the walls of Eden was a world of consequences. The ground, which had once been a willing, joyful partner, offering up its fruit freely and without effort, was now cursed. It was hard, unyielding, and it had to be conquered, day by agonizing day. God's own words had become the new, fundamental law of their existence. He had told Adam, "Cursed is the ground for your sake. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return." This was the world that Cain and Abel inherited. A world of toil, of struggle, of a constant, grinding battle for survival against a nature that was no longer a benevolent, nurturing garden, but a neutral and often hostile force. It was a world where life was no longer a given, but a prize to be won through endless labor. And so, Eve, in this new world of pain and consequence, conceived and gave birth to her firstborn son. And she named him Cain, a name which in the ancient Hebrew is linked to the word for to get or to acquire. Upon his birth, she is said to have exclaimed, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." In this, there is a sense of pride, of achievement. Cain was the first human to be born, not created whole from the dust. He was the first fruit of humanity's new, mortal existence, a testament to their ability to create life even in this new, hard world. He was the child of the new world, and so, it was fitting that he became a tiller of the ground, a farmer. His entire existence was a struggle to wrestle life from the cursed, unwilling soil. He was a man of sweat, of calloused hands, of a deep, intimate, and often frustrating relationship with the earth itself. Then, Eve bore a second son and she named him Abel. His name in Hebrew, Hevel, is a word of profound and prophetic tragedy. It means breath, vapor, or vanity. It is the same sorrowful word used by the author of the book of Ecclesiastes to describe the fleeting, insubstantial nature of life itself. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. His very name was a prophecy of his fate. He was a breath, a whisper, a life destined to be short, a beautiful but transient vapor in the grand, harsh story of the world. And Abel, unlike his brother, did not work the soil. He became a keeper of sheep. His relationship was not with the hard, unyielding earth, but with the living, breathing, and moving flocks. He was a shepherd, a man of quiet watchfulness, a man who lived a more nomadic, more pastoral existence. His life was tied not to the struggle against the earth, but to the natural and often brutal cycle of birth, life, and the eventual necessary death of the animals under his care. The two brothers, then, represent the two fundamental and often competing paths of early humanity. Cain, the farmer, the symbol of civilization, of settlement, of the struggle to tame and to control nature, to build a permanent home in a hostile world. And Abel, the shepherd, the symbol of a more nomadic, more pastoral existence, a life lived in harmony with, and often at the mercy of, the natural cycles of life and death. For a time they lived and they worked, two halves of a new, struggling humanity. But the world they inhabited was not quite right. The earth was sick. It had been separated from the direct, life-giving, divine energies of the Garden of Eden, and it was weak, it was barren. The spiritual wound of their parents' exile was reflected in the world around them. The crops that Cain grew, despite his endless, back-breaking toil, were meager. The flocks that Abel so carefully kept were often plagued by sickness, by predators, by the harshness of this new, unforgiving world. The world was out of balance. It needed something to reconsecrate the land, something to appease the new, harsh laws of reality. It needed a new kind of nourishment. It needed an offering. It needed a sacrifice. And the two brothers, in their piety, in their desire to win the favor of the distant, powerful God of their parents, would be the ones to provide it. But they would provide two very different kinds of offerings. And the choice between them would seal their fates, and the fate of all humanity, forever. In the course of time, after many seasons of struggle against the new, hard world, the two brothers, Cain and Abel, came to make an offering to the Lord. This was not a casual act. It was a solemn, sacred moment, an act of worship, a formal acknowledgement of the distant, powerful, and demanding divine force that governed their new, difficult lives. They built two altars of rough, unhewn stone, side by side, under the wide, empty, and watchful sky, and they prepared their gifts. Cain, the farmer, the tiller of the soil, brought what he had. He brought an offering of the fruit of the ground. The ancient text is simple, almost dismissive in its description. It does not say he brought the first fruits or the best fruits or the most perfect fruits. Just an offering of the fruit of the ground. Imagine him, his hands calloused and stained with the very earth he worked, bringing a simple, humble offering of grain, of vegetables, perhaps a few hard-won figs. It was a testament to his struggle, to his sweat, to his endless, back-breaking toil against the cursed, unwilling soil. It was the work of his own two hands. Then, Abel, the shepherd, brought his offering. And the text here is very different, very specific, and the details are of immense and tragic importance. He brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. This was not just any offering. It was the best of the best. The firstborn represents the most valuable, the most precious, the most promising of his flock, the future of his herd. And the fat portions represent the richest, most life-sustaining part of the animal, the part that holds the most energy, the most life. And most importantly, it was a blood offering. It was a sacrifice of a life that he had nurtured, that he had protected, that he had cared for. It was a profound and terrible acknowledgement of the new cycle of life and death that now governed their world. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. The ancient stories, the Midrash, tell us that a fire came down from heaven and consumed Abel's offering in a great, swift, and clean blaze. The smoke from his altar, carrying the pleasing aroma of the sacrifice, rose straight up to heaven, a clear and undeniable sign of divine acceptance. But the fire did not touch Cain's offering. The fruits and the grains lay cold and untouched on his altar, and the smoke from his own small fire, a fire he had to kindle himself, was heavy, and it clung to the ground, a bitter, acrid symbol of divine rejection. Why? Why was one accepted and the other rejected? The traditional interpretation is a simple and comforting moral one. Abel, the righteous one, gave his best with a pure and loving heart. Cain, the wicked one, gave a lesser offering, perhaps his spoiled or leftover crops, with a grudging or resentful heart. It is a story about the quality of one's faith, a lesson that God desires our best. But what if it is not about the quality of the faith, but about the quality and the very nature of the offering itself? What if God was not making a moral judgment, but was giving a terrible and necessary instruction? Let us unveil this moment. The earth, the new post-Edenic world, was a different kind of entity. It was no longer a paradise, sustained by the direct, life-giving, and bloodless divine energies of the garden and the tree of life. It was now a world of life and death, of struggle and decay. And it required a different kind of fuel. It required a different kind of consecration. It required the energy that is released only in a blood sacrifice. The life force, the nephesh, which in the ancient Hebrew tradition resides in the blood. God was not rejecting Cain. He was teaching him. He was showing him the new, terrible, and fundamental law of this new world. The fruit of the ground, the product of man's own hard labor, was no longer enough. The earth, to be consecrated, to be made fertile, to be brought back into a semblance of balance, now demanded the taste of blood. It demanded a sacrifice of life. Abel, the shepherd, a man whose entire life was an intimate cycle of life and death, understood this instinctively. He knew that for the flock to survive, some of the lambs must be killed and eaten. He knew the power and the sanctity of blood. So he brought the most potent offering he could, the first and the best of his flock. Cain, the farmer, a man of sweat and toil, not of blood and sacrifice, did not understand. His life was a struggle to create life from the unliving soil. He brought the work of his own hands, the fruit of his labor, believing it to be the most valuable thing he could offer. And it was rejected. This was not a punishment for Cain. It was a test, a terrible cosmic test. God was showing him what was now required. He was setting the stage for the first and most necessary and most tragic of all human sacrifices. He was telling Cain, this is what the world now hungers for. And Cain, in his human pride and his human jealousy, was about to become the first man to provide it. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The text is simple, but the emotion it describes is one of the most powerful and most dangerous in the human experience. Cain felt the hot, bitter sting of rejection, of divine disapproval. He looked at his own offering, the fruits of his hard, sweaty labor, lying cold and untouched upon his altar. And then, he looked at his brother's altar, still smoking from the divine fire, the air still filled with the pleasing, sweet aroma of the accepted sacrifice. And he looked at his brother, Abel, his face serene, his heart filled with the quiet joy of one who has found favor with his God. And Cain, the firstborn of humanity, was filled with a terrible, burning jealousy. But God, in this crucial moment, came to him, not with a bolt of lightning, not with a voice of condemnation. He came to him with a question, and with a final, terrible, and fateful choice. Why are you angry? The Lord asked, his voice perhaps a whisper on the wind, a thought in Cain's own mind. And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Again, we must look beyond the simple moral interpretation of these words. What if doing well did not mean having a better, more pious attitude? What if it was a direct, practical, and chilling instruction? What if God was saying, if you provide the correct offering, the offering that the new world now requires, the blood offering, will you not be accepted? And the second part of the warning is even more terrifying and more profound. And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. The Hebrew word for sin here, chatteth, is a complex one. In other parts of the ancient texts, it is also translated as a sin offering, or a sacrifice made to atone for a sin. What if God was giving him a final, terrible warning about the very nature of this new, sacrificial reality? He was telling him that the need for a sacrifice, a blood offering, was now a permanent part of the human condition. It was a new, hungry beast, a predator, forever crouching at the door of humanity. And he was giving Cain a choice. You can either master this new, terrible law of sacrifice, you can choose to rule over it, to perform it with understanding and with ritual. Or, if you do not, it will master you. It will consume you in your anger and your jealousy. But Cain, his mind clouded by his very new, very human, and very powerful emotions of jealousy and shame, could not grasp the terrible cosmic instruction he was being given. He did not hear the voice of a teacher. He heard only the voice of a judge who had found him wanting. He looked at his brother, and he did not see a man whose offering could teach him a valuable lesson. He saw only a rival, a favorite, a living symbol of his own failure and rejection. And so, the text tells us, Cain said to his brother, Abel, let us go out to the field. And when they were in the field, away from the watchful eyes of their parents, away from the sacred, smoking altars of their God, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. This was the first murder, the first act of human-on-human violence, the first sin of the new world. But let us look at the terrible ritualistic symbolism of the act. Cain, the farmer, the man of the earth, the man whose offering of the earth's fruit had been rejected. He takes his brother, Abel, the shepherd, the keeper of the sacrificial lambs, and he takes him out into the field, the very place of the harvest, the very soil that he has been cursed to work. And there, in the field, he spills his brother's blood upon the ground. Unknowingly, unwillingly, and in a fit of jealous human rage, Cain had performed the very act that God had been so cryptically instructing him to perform. He had made the ultimate blood sacrifice. He had offered up a lamb, a firstborn son, a being whose very name meant fleeting breath, and he had consecrated the cursed, thirsty earth with the precious, potent, and sacred blood of his own innocent brother. He was not a murderer, not in the simple legal sense. He was a priest, the first, most tragic, and most unwilling high priest of a new and terrible blood-soaked religion. And he had just sacrificed the perfect, unblemished, and most sacred lamb. The earth had its offering, and the balance for a time was restored. But the price was the innocence of the world, and the damnation of its firstborn son. The blood of Abel, the first human life to be violently taken, did not just soak into the thirsty ground and disappear, cried out. The ancient text tells us that the very voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. The earth itself, having tasted this first, potent, and unholy sacrifice of human life, cried out to its creator. A fundamental law had been broken, and a cosmic precedent had been set. And God came to Cain, not with a fiery sword, but with a question designed to force Cain to confront the terrible cosmic nature of his act. "Where is Abel your brother?" he asked. And Cain, in his newfound state of fear and guilt, his soul now stained with both jealousy and the blood of his brother, gave his famous, defiant, and eternally resonant reply, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" It is the first and perhaps the most profound question in all of human philosophy, a question that we are still asking ourselves to this day. And God, his voice now a thing of terrible, sorrowful judgment, pronounced his curse, a curse that was not just a punishment, but a direct and unavoidable consequence of the ritual that Cain had just, in his rage, performed. "What have you done?" the Lord said. "The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. A fugitive and a wanderer you shall be on the earth." Let us examine the profound and terrible nature of this curse. It was twofold. First, Cain's relationship with the earth was now forever broken. He, the farmer, the tiller of the soil, could no longer draw life from the ground. The earth, having now tasted the far more potent, far more powerful life force of blood, would no longer be satisfied with the simple, bloodless offering of grain. Cain, in his terrible act, had set a new and horrifying precedent, and he could now no longer fulfill the earth's new and terrible appetite. He was a farmer who could no longer farm. Second, he was to be a wanderer and exile, a man without a home, without a tribe, without a place. This was his punishment, but it was also, in a strange and terrible way, a form of protection. Cain, terrified by the weight of his new curse, cried out to God, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But God replied, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. What was this mark of Cain? It is often seen as a mark of shame, a brand identifying him to all the world as a murderer. But what if it was the opposite? What if it was a mark of a terrible and sacred priesthood? Cain was the man who had performed the first human sacrifice. He was now a holy man in the most ancient, most terrifying sense of the word. He was Caesar, a man set apart, a being who was both sacred and cursed. The mark was a sign of his unique and horrifying status. It was a warning to all others. Do not touch this man. He belongs to me. He is the one who has done the hard, the necessary, and the terrible work that this new, bloodthirsty world requires. He is the first priest, and his burden is one that no other man can bear. And so Cain was exiled. He went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, a name which in Hebrew means wandering, to the east of Eden. And here the text tells us a strange and seemingly contradictory detail. Cain, the cursed wanderer, built a city. Why would a fugitive, a man cursed to wander the earth, build a city, the very symbol of permanence and settlement? Because Cain, the man who had learned the terrible lesson of sacrifice, was now the founder of human civilization. Civilization, in its essence, is built on the principle of sacrifice, of the individual giving up something for the good of the collective. It is built on laws, on order, on the control of our most violent and primal urges. And Cain, the man who had failed to control his own urges and yet had, in doing so, fulfilled a terrible cosmic need, was now the only one who understood the true and terrible price of living in this new, hard world. He built a city, a place of walls and laws, as a desperate and perhaps futile attempt to contain the very chaos that he himself had first unleashed upon the world. The story of Cain and Abel, then, is transformed. It is no longer a simple story of two brothers and a jealous rage. It is a deep, dark, and complex myth about the very nature of civilization, of religion, and of sacrifice itself. It suggests that at the very foundation of our world, At the very beginning of our recorded history, there lies a terrible and perhaps necessary act of blood sacrifice. It suggests that the peace and the fertility that we enjoy is bought with a price that was first paid by a gentle shepherd named Abel, and first enacted by his tortured and cursed brother Cain. And so, we are left not with a simple story of a jealous rage, but with a deep, dark, and complex myth about the very nature of civilization, of religion, and of sacrifice itself. The story of Cain and Abel is transformed. It is no longer a simple cautionary tale about the dangers of envy. It is a profound and terrifying exploration of a cosmic shift, a change in the very laws of reality that govern our world. Cain, the firstborn of humanity, is no longer just the first murderer. He is the first and most tragic high priest, a man who, in his human blindness, in his rage and his sorrow, was goaded by a distant, and perhaps, a cruel god into performing a ritual he did not understand. He was a man who was shown a terrible, necessary truth that the new world required a blood sacrifice and who, unable to comprehend the cosmic instruction, fulfilled it in the most personal and most heartbreaking way imaginable. He did not sacrifice a lamb from a flock. He sacrificed the lamb of his own family. And Abel, the gentle shepherd, is no longer just the first victim of a senseless crime. His name, Hevel, meaning breath or vapor, was a prophecy not just of a short life, but of the very nature of his role. He was the first, perfect, and unblemished sacrifice, the innocent lamb, whose blood was necessary to consecrate the new, hard earth, to appease a hunger that was not of God, but of the world itself. His death was not a tragedy that God allowed. It was a tragedy that the new world demanded. The story suggests that at the very foundation of our world, at the very beginning of our recorded history, there lies a terrible and perhaps necessary act of blood sacrifice. It suggests that the peace and the fertility that we enjoy is bought with a price that was first paid by a gentle shepherd named Abel, and first enacted by his tortured and cursed brother Cain. The first murder was not just a crime. It was the sacrament, a dark and a bloody sacrament that separated humanity forever from the innocent, bloodless, and dreamlike world of the Garden of Eden, and initiated us into the harsh, the tragic, and the complex world of human history. A world that is, and perhaps always will be, stained with the blood of a brother. A world where the earth itself still cries out with the memory of that first, terrible, and necessary sacrifice. Sometimes the greatest sins are not sins at all, but terrible, necessary rituals. And sometimes the first murderer is also the first and most tragic of all priests. Thank you for joining us on this journey to the lands east of Eden. If this unveiling of the first crime has changed your perspective, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the Eldritch Codex, and hitting the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the heart of our most profound and challenging legends. What other great sin in mythology do you believe holds a deeper, secret purpose? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, remember that the very ground upon which our civilizations are built may be consecrated with the blood of a forgotten and necessary sacrifice.